Edward Whitmore was accustomed to silence. Not the gentle silence of a peaceful Oxfordshire morning, where sparrows singing in a dew-soaked rose garden could still the heart, but a heavy silence, clinging like a damp coat to the skin, making every breath a burden. Since the day Eleanor died in a London hospital delivery room, the vast Whitmore family estate had turned into a gilded tomb. Every corner whispered her presence. The music room with its piano draped in white, the empty glasshouse where she once tended heirloom roses, even the oak spiral staircase where she liked to read in the late afternoon light. Everything remained, except her. And Edward was trapped between memory and the present, unable to move on. He was only 35, an age many considered the height of one's career, and he truly was at his peak. The financial investment firm he had founded had expanded from London across Europe, his fortune more than enough to buy a country manor, if he wished. But there was one thing he could not buy: peaceful sleep, nor the survival of his infant daughter, Charlotte or Lottie, as Eleanor had lovingly called her during pregnancy. Lottie was 8 months old. Instead of plump and rosy like other babies, she was frail, her face gaunt, her eyes always red from crying. Since Eleanor's death, every attempt to nourish her had failed. The most expensive imported formula, feeding regimens prescribed by leading physicians, even private nurses, all in vain. Lottie cried until her voice broke, vomited, and wasted away. 3 nannies had already quit within weeks, unable to endure the relentless, heart-wrenching wails. Edward had spent countless nights awake, pacing with her in his arms, trying to coax drops of milk past her tiny lips, each attempt ending in despair. He had signed multi-million-pound contracts without the slightest tremor in his hand, but watching his daughter reject the bottle left him powerless, as guilty as a condemned man. Tonight was no different. After 18 grueling hours of meetings in London, he returned home in his private car. The grandfather clock in the drawing room struck 11, its chimes echoing through the cold emptiness of Whitmore Manor. Loosening his tie and unbuttoning his shirt collar, he stepped onto the long, red-carpeted hallway. He braced himself for Lottie's cries, usually carried across the 2nd floor, but instead, he heard singing. It was not the polished voice of the opera singers once invited to society banquets. It was raw, trembling, yet warm, a lullaby, unfamiliar, with echoes of ancient folk melodies and a tender undercurrent of sorrow. The voice did not come from a speaker, but from a living person inside his house. Edward froze, heart pounding step by step. He climbed the staircase, each tread heavy as stone. A dim yellow light spilled from the nursery. The door stood ajar. He pushed it open, and what he saw made his blood run cold. In a wooden rocking chair sat a woman, cradling Charlotte. Her black hair was neatly pinned, her skin warm brown under the lamplight, her uniform the navy blue of the cleaning service that had replaced his retired housekeeper. Yet what stunned Edward was not her unexpected presence. It was that she was nursing his daughter. Charlotte, who had wailed for months on end, now nestled against the stranger's breast, drinking greedily as though she had found a lost lifeline. Her tiny hands clutched at the fabric of the woman's blouse. The cries were gone, replaced by steady breaths and occasional sighs of contentment. Edward stood frozen. Shock, confusion, and relief washed over him. Never had Lottie looked so peaceful. Her cheeks glowed with color, her skin no longer ashen, yet questions thundered in his mind. Who gave her the right? What if something happened? Was this reckless or even unlawful? The floor creaked under his step. The woman startled, lifting her head. Her honey-brown eyes gleamed with fear and defiance. Tears streaked her face, but her voice did not falter. "I'm sorry," she whispered, struggling to steady herself. "I tried everything, the bottle, the pacifier." She cried until she nearly choked. I couldn't just watch." She lowered her gaze, trembling as if awaiting his wrath. But Edward, instead of rage, rasped out only 2 words: "Don't stop." Silence stretched between them. In her eyes, he saw not only fear, but a deep sorrow. He recognized instantly the look of someone who had lost what was most precious. He sank onto the window bench, keeping his distance not to frighten her. Charlotte stirred briefly in the woman's arms, then drifted back into the peaceful sleep she had never known since birth. "How long?" Edward asked, his voice unsteady, as though signing a death warrant. "Over 20 minutes. When I picked her up, she was nearly choking from crying." Edward nodded, his gaze fixed on his daughter's now flushed face. A strange, sacred feeling surged through him. At this moment, hope seemed to have returned to him. "What's your name?" he asked softly. "Amara Johnson. I was assigned here 3 days ago by the service company." Her voice faltered, then broke. "I once had a baby girl, Grace. She was 8 months old when she died. Congenital heart defect. Nothing could save her." Edward closed his eyes. Her words pierced him like a blade, striking the grief he knew all too well. He instantly understood why she could soothe Charlotte, why her body still carried milk, and why her eyes held oceans of tears. In that small room, where a baby had just reclaimed breath and warmth, 2 strangers sat across from one another, a wealthy master of the house and a simple maid. Yet both shared an unspeakable loss. Between them lay a sleeping child, living proof that maternal love and human compassion could sometimes cross every boundary. Edward knew his life had just turned onto a road from which there was no return. In the soft, golden glow of the night lamp, Charlotte still lay nestled against Amara's breast. The baby's steady breathing blended with the woman's racing heartbeat, forming a strange, fragile, untouchable music. Edward sat silently on the window bench, hands clenched together as though the slightest movement might shatter the miracle unfolding before him. After a long pause, he spoke. "You said your daughter's name was Grace?" Amara nodded gently, her eyes never leaving Charlotte. Even in grief, she kept soothing the child, as if caring for an infant was a reflex etched into her very bones. "Grace," her voice caught. "If she had lived, she would be the same age as Lottie. I still dream of her, hear her crying at night. I wake to find my chest drenched with milk. My body still believes she needs me. Though the truth is," she stopped, swallowing her tears. "The truth is, she's gone." Edward felt his throat tighten. He had lost Eleanor on the delivery table, but at least he still had Charlotte to hold, to pour his grief into. Amara was different. She had lost everything left with a body still producing life for a child who would never return. He blurted out, "So, that's why you can nurse her?" "Yes," Amara finished, her voice soft but clear. "When I heard Lottie cry, it was as if Grace was calling. I know I shouldn't have. I'm just the new cleaner, with no right at all. But when I saw her choking on her own sobs, I couldn't turn away. If you want to call the police or dismiss me immediately, I'll accept it." Edward studied her. In her eyes, there was no pleading, only dignity. She had lost everything, yet still clung to the last pieces of pride, honesty, and the heart of a mother. He exhaled, leaning against the wall. "I don't intend to call the police. You saved my daughter. Do you know how many doctors have tried and failed? How many nurses gave up? They said she was difficult to raise, so I should prepare myself. And now, in barely half an hour, she sleeps as if she's never known pain." Amara gave a sad smile, still patting Charlotte's back. "Sometimes medicine forgets that humans are more than bodies. Infants need skin against skin, a heartbeat, a familiar scent, all the things tied to motherhood. Formula can't replace that." Edward was silent. He remembered the endless nights of Lottie crying until she fainted in exhaustion, and himself powerless to comfort her. He remembered the doctor's looks, half pity, half detachment, when they told him to accept reality. And now, that very reality was being defied by a stranger, here in his daughter's nursery. "Amara." He spoke her name for the first time. "I owe you more than I can ever say." She shook her head. "No, you owe me nothing. I did only what any mother would do." But, her gaze darkened, the world outside won't see it that way. A woman of color, nursing the child of a wealthy white man she works for. Do you know what they would say? Edward frowned. Of course, he knew. History was scarred with women of color forced into wet nursing for white families. Gossip, scornful eyes, all of it would resurface if this ever became known. "Let them talk," Edward said curtly, his voice taut as a drawn bow. "What matters is that my daughter is alive." Amara looked at him, surprised by his firmness. Then she sighed. "I wish things were as simple as you make them sound. I've already lost everything once. I don't want to become the reason another family is destroyed. You must understand, I'm only here temporarily. I'll leave when the milk runs dry, when Lottie accepts the bottle." "No." The word burst from Edward before he realized. He lowered his voice. "What I mean is, Charlotte needs you. And perhaps I do too." He stopped, afraid to say more. The room sank into silence. Night wind hissed through the window frame, carrying the damp scent of the rose garden outside. Charlotte stirred faintly, then fell back into deep sleep, as though confirming that Amara's arms were her safest haven. Amara raised her eyes, meeting Edward's gaze. "I'll stay, but on one condition. I am not a servant, nor a temporary solution. I need autonomy in caring for Lottie. No one is to treat me as a tool. If you agree to that, I'll devote myself fully to it. If not, I'll leave tomorrow." Edward gave a rare smile, the first since Eleanor's death. "You think I'm in any position to bargain? You just saved the only child I have. I'll accept any condition you set." Amara nodded. For the first time, a spark of hope flickered in her eyes. Yet at that very moment, fear crept into her heart. Was she opening a path strewn with prejudice and loss? But then, gazing at Charlotte's peaceful sleep in her arms, Amara knew that sometimes love was stronger than reason. Mornings at Whitmore Estate always carried a somber beauty. The first light of day filtered through the mist, falling over the neglected garden at the side of the house, where the rose beds Eleanor once tended now lay overrun with weeds. The only sounds were the crow's distant cawing and Amara's quick footsteps on the rain-damp gravel. She had been up since dawn, not because of her cleaning duties, but because of Charlotte. Since that fateful night, the baby no longer screamed endlessly. Instead, each time she awoke, she wriggled in search of familiar warmth, as if her tiny body had already recognized its new lifeline. Amara knew she had crossed an invisible boundary. Edward knew it too. He stood at the upstairs window, watching Amara sling Charlotte through the garden. The sight was both comforting and unsettling. For years, he had lived in a world where everything could be measured in numbers, contracts, and clauses. And now, the only thing keeping his daughter alive was something no one could have predicted: the arms of a stranger. That afternoon, they sat across from each other in the drawing room. Edward had set aside his vest, wearing only a simple turtleneck sweater. It softened his aristocratic image, but made him look more weary. Amara wore her navy blue uniform, but her bearing no longer resembled a mere servant. She sat upright, hands on her knees, her gaze calm yet resolute. "I want us to be clear," Edward began. "Charlotte has changed drastically since being with you. I can't deny it. Therefore, please stay not as a cleaner, but in another role, as her wet nurse." Amara clasped her hands tightly. She had suspected this request would come, but hearing it aloud made her heart pound. "Do you know what that means?" she asked slowly. "It's not just a job, it's a bond, and it's also a risk." Edward nodded. "I understand, but I've already lost Eleanor. I can't lose Charlotte too. You're her last hope." His words shook Amara. For an instant, she saw Grace again, her tiny lips turned blue in the Birmingham hospital as Amara held her, powerless. Since that day, her body had continued producing milk as if mocking her loss. And now, that very milk was saving another child. "Edward, have you thought about the prejudice?" Amara asked bluntly, her voice low but sharp. "You are a white gentleman, heir to an old family estate. I am a woman of color, a widow who lost her child, working as a servant. If people found out, what would they say? They'd call me a manipulator, or worse, see me as a reminder of a shameful history when women like me were forced to nurse the children of the elite." Edward faltered briefly, but did not look away. "I know, and I know I can't erase history, but I can choose my stance. I don't care about whispers, Amara. I care that my daughter is alive." Amara searched his eyes. His answer was not careless. It came from a man who had known loss and understood the price of indifference. Yet her fear lingered, not only of society, but of herself, of loving Charlotte too deeply, only to lose her one day. "All right," she said softly. "I'll agree. But there are conditions." Edward raised his brows, signaling her to continue. "First," Amara said, "I need full authority over Charlotte's feeding and care. No interference, no doubts as long as her well-being is my priority." "Agreed," Edward said without hesitation. "Second," she said, "I need weekly time to keep up my pediatric nursing license. This arrangement can't last forever. I don't want to be left with nothing when it ends." "Done," Edward replied at once. "I'll arrange transport whenever you need." Amara drew a deep breath, then gave her most complex condition. "And finally, I want absolute respect. I am not beneath anyone here. I am a woman, a mother. I will not endure scornful looks from anyone in this household. If guests come, you must defend me against every word of gossip." Edward was silent for a few seconds. Then he stood, stepping closer. His gaze was stern but warm. "Amara Johnson, you have my word. Anyone who disrespects you disrespects me. This is Charlotte's home. If you accept, it will be your home too." Amara froze for a moment. "Your home." The phrase rang in her head like both a promise and a threat. How long had it been since she had felt the notion of home? Since Daniel left, since Grace died, she had lived only in rented rooms, burying herself in endless work to forget the emptiness. She had never thought she'd hear the word home again. "Then, I accept," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. That evening, when Amara entered Charlotte's room to nurse her again, Edward stood at the doorway, watching. He did not interrupt, he only observed every detail. Amara held his daughter as though she were her own flesh and blood, hummed an unfamiliar lullaby, and Charlotte melted completely in her arms. And in that moment, Edward realized, this agreement was not only salvation for Charlotte, it was salvation for himself, a man who had long forgotten how to believe in healing. The first days after the agreement slipped by in an unfamiliar rhythm. Charlotte changed with each passing day, her eyes brighter, her cheeks rosier, her cries no longer desperate but broken into gentle sounds. Edward was still unaccustomed to Amara's constant presence in the house, but he could not deny that the emptiness seemed less absolute wherever she was. On Thursday afternoon, as Amara carried Charlotte along the upstairs corridor, a sudden gust flung open the heavy wooden door at the far end. The crash startled her. The door stood ajar, revealing a dust-laden room where sunlight slanted through faded curtains. She approached, curious. The space felt unlike the meticulously kept rooms of the manor. Inside, beneath a sheet long shrouded in dust, stood a grand piano. Scattered sheets of music littered the stand, their ink blurred with time. Amara gently set Charlotte in the carry-cot, then stepped forward. She brushed off the cloth, tugging it away. The piano emerged black, gleaming beneath its coat of dust. She lifted the lid. The ivory keys glowed faintly in the late light. On the stand lay unfinished drafts, notes broken mid-phrase, like sentences left unsaid. "A lullaby, but incomplete," Amara murmured. She had studied piano as a child in her Birmingham church. Her hands hovered, hesitant, before pressing a few notes along the abandoned score. The sound rose unpolished but sincere. Charlotte stirred, opened her eyes, then grew still, listening with unusual calm. "You shouldn't be here." The sudden voice behind her made Amara start. Edward stood at the doorway, his gaze both startled and shuttered. I'm sorry," Amara said quickly, rising. The door was open. "I was curious." Edward entered, his eyes fixed on the manuscript. His fingers brushed it lightly, as though touching a relic. This was Eleanor's. The air grew heavy. Her name was still an open wound. "She wrote it?" Amara asked softly. "We wrote it together," Edward replied, sinking onto the bench. "A lullaby for Charlotte. Eleanor thought our baby would need it when she cried. But she never finished it." He laid his hands on the keys, playing the opening notes. The melody rose, achingly beautiful only to collapse midway, leaving silence thick as grief. Amara listened, her heart tightening. It felt like hearing a story broken off, like an embrace never completed. "May I?" she asked cautiously. Edward looked up. "May you what?" "Try to continue it." He blinked in surprise, then shifted aside, making room. Amara sat down, Charlotte nestled against her, and placed her hand lightly on the keys. She replayed the half-finished tune, then, by instinct, carried it forward. It was imperfect but flowed softly, like a tender answer to a call cut short. Edward turned to her, astonished by the natural ease. He joined in with his left hand, grounding the melody. Their notes wove together, unexpectedly seamless. For the first time in months, the lullaby played to its end. Charlotte smiled in her sleep, clutching Amara's finger. Edward stopped, staring at her. That was the part Eleanor used to hum. I could never capture it, but you just found it. Amara was silent, her pulse quick. She felt as if Eleanor had entrusted her with a message, not of replacement, but of continuation. Music is a conversation, Amara said softly. Sometimes one begins, and another finishes. No one owns it. It exists only to be shared. Edward turned away, eyes wet. He whispered, Eleanor would have liked you. Amara's throat tightened. For the first time, she was not only a wet nurse or a servant. She had become a companion in a grief no one else had touched. That night, after Amara left Charlotte's room, Edward remained in the music room, repeatedly playing the newly completed lullaby. Its notes echoed through the manor, breathing life into walls long resigned to silence. Amara paused in the corridor, listening. A strange tide rose within her, gratitude and fear. Gratitude for being allowed to mend a wound. Fear, because she felt herself stepping too close to a boundary, the thin line between duty and feeling. She hugged Charlotte tighter and whispered, Sleep well, Lottie. We must be careful. While Charlotte slept soundly in her crib by the window one noon, Amara wandered through the estate. She had been here nearly 2 weeks, but had spent most of her time in the nursery and kitchen. The mansion was a maze-carpeted corridors, walls lined with oil portraits of Whitmore ancestors, all exuding a wealth tinged with gloom. Her steps led her to a path at the back, where tall grass and wild roses tangled together. At its center rose a glass structure, like the glasshouse, like a transparent palace left in ruin. Amara stopped, her heart tightening. As a child, she had adored the greenhouses in Birmingham city parks, where her grandmother would take her every weekend. In her memory, they brimmed with life, green stretching upward no matter the season. This one, by contrast, stood silent as a tomb. She pushed open the heavy glass door. Hinges screeched, and the space revealed itself. Empty soil beds, an irrigation system intact but coated in dust, the damp smell of abandonment. On a long wooden bench lay pruning shears, watering cans and gloves, arranged as if waiting for hands that never return. You found it. Edward's voice came from behind. Amara turned to see him at the doorway, his eyes distant. This was Eleanor's dream, he said. She wanted to make the glasshouse bloom year-round. But from the day she died, everything here died with her. Amara strolled to a soil bed and ran her fingers through the dry earth. It was still fertile, only missing human warmth. She smiled faintly. It's not dead. It's only waiting for someone to love it again. Edward said nothing, as if unable to believe. He had hired gardeners before, but all had given up. They planted, and the plants withered. They tried again, but still nothing grew. He had come to think the glasshouse was cursed, silently rejecting every hand but Eleanor's. Amara looked up, eyes shining with resolve. I want to try. We'll start with something simple: basil, mint, and tomatoes. Once they thrive, we'll plant flowers, and in the end, Eleanor's roses. Edward gave a short laugh, a rare sound in this house that startled him. You really think you can wake this place? Not me, Amara said. Us. But only if you want to. He hesitated, then nodded. The next day, they began. Amara wore an old shirt, jeans, and borrowed gloves. Edward, used to tailored suits and polished shoes, looked awkward in a simple sweater and garden boots. Charlotte lay in her crib on the porch, close enough to hear their voices and laughter. Amara instructed, The soil's still good. We need to loosen it, then sow the seeds. Careful with your hands. Edward frowned as he gripped the spade, clumsy as a schoolboy in a craft class. Amara burst out laughing. A millionaire who can't hold a spade. Don't worry, I won't tell the press. He glanced at her, sheepish, then chuckled too. Their laughter filled the glasshouse, bouncing off the domed glass, as if waking the space from slumber. They worked side by side, sweat beading on their brows. Edward's movements grew steadier, while Amara sowed seeds with care. They shared small stories, her grandmother's vegetable garden, his and Eleanor's failed attempt at growing roses. Each tale carried a touch of dusted laughter, edged with bittersweet. By dusk, the beds were lined with tiny sprouts. Amara wiped her hands, gazing at them. See? They only needed a chance. Edward's eyes turned to Charlotte, asleep in her crib, her face pink with health. He whispered, just like her. In the days that followed, the glasshouse became their shared refuge. Each morning, after feeding Charlotte, Amara brought her out to listen to the birds while she and Edward worked. He learned to water, to prune. Once, clumsiness left his hand cut, and Amara quickly bandaged it, her touch gentle on his skin. The brief contact silenced them both, as if they could hear each other's heartbeat in the air thick with new life. Amara often sang as she worked folk, lullabies her mother had once taught. At first, Edward only listened, but gradually he began to hum along. One afternoon, as they tied up the young tomato plants, he murmured, "You know, for the first time in 8 months, I feel like I'm truly alive." Amara looked up, catching the light in his eyes. She didn't answer, only smiled. But inside, she knew the glasshouse was reviving more than plants. It was reviving them. That night, back in her room, Amara held Charlotte close and whispered, "Do you see, Lottie? The flowers will bloom again, and maybe so will the human heart." By late afternoon, dark clouds gathered from the valley, blotting out the last gold of the day. The air smelled of rain, gusts lashing the rose hedges by the glasshouse, thorns scraping with a shrill hiss. Amara was tying the young tomato plants when Edward set down the watering can. Eyes lifted to the sky. "We should head back before the storm breaks," he said tensely. But even as he spoke, thunder cracked, lightning tearing across the heavens. Charlotte wailed in her crib, her cry trembling, splintering. Amara rushed to her, scooping her up, pressing her close. "Shh! It's all right, darling. Just thunder, nothing more," she whispered. But the baby shook violently, face flushed crimson. Rain slammed against the glass roof, pounding like hammers. Edward hurried to bolt the doors, but the gale rattled the frames until the panes shuddered. The lights flickered, then went out, leaving only a dim, ashen glow. Amara clutched Charlotte, rocking, humming faintly, but the storm drowned her song. The baby's sobs grew frantic, her breath shallow, frighteningly like the attack that had once left Grace blue-lipped in Amara's arms. The memory stabbed through her, and she trembled. Edward saw and acted swiftly. He grabbed spare blankets from the tool room and spread them in the farthest corner from the glass. "We need shelter. Sit here with Charlotte, away from the windows." Amara obeyed, wrapping the baby and herself in the blankets. Edward sat beside her, his back shielding against the draft. The small corner warmed with their presence, though outside thunder still roared. Charlotte sobbed until she hiccuped. Amara looked at Edward, desperate, tears shimmering in each lightning flash. "I've tried everything, she won't calm." Edward placed a hand on her shoulder, speaking softly but firmly. "Don't try to fix it, just be with her. Sometimes the only thing we can do is endure alongside them." His words caught in Amara's chest. She pressed Charlotte tighter, whispering, "I'm here, Lottie. Mama's here with you." The word Mama slipped out before she realized. She froze, but Charlotte seemed to hear, her sobs easing into minor hiccups, then subsiding. In the darkness, Edward watched, his heart twisting. He recalled all those nights of solitary struggle, helpless, and now this stranger brought the safety he never could. He murmured, almost lost to the storm, "Amara, I don't know how I'd manage without you." She looked up, her eyes glistening. In the lightning's flare, their gazes locked. The storm's din fell away, distance erased. Edward lifted a hand, brushing her cheek gently. Amara's heart pounded. She longed to lean into the comfort, yet her reason pulled back. "Don't," she whispered, trembling. "Tonight is a storm. Every feeling is magnified. We can't. We mustn't cross that line." Edward stilled, but left his hand against her face, warm, tender. Perhaps, or perhaps, the storm only reveals what was always there. Amara was silent. Charlotte had fallen asleep, breath steady at last. Outside, rain still lashed, thunder still howled. But in that corner of the glass house, a fragile peace flickered, the peace of three souls learning how to be a family. By dawn, the storm eased. Raindrops clung to the glass roof, glittering like shattered crystal. Edward opened the door, drawing in the fresh post-storm air. Amara followed, Charlotte sleeping on her shoulder. "Thank you," she whispered. "Without you, I might have broken with her." Edward looked at her, his gaze fathomless. "No, it was you who carried us through the night." They stood in silence, then walked back toward the manor together. Their steps were slow, as though afraid to break the invisible thread the storm had woven between them. After the stormy night, the glass house shone again, glittering with raindrops clinging to new leaves, proof of life reborn. Charlotte grew stronger each day. Her desperate cries turned into cheerful babbles, her eyes sparkling whenever she saw Amara. To Edward, it was nothing short of a miracle. He looked at his daughter and knew, much of it was thanks to the woman patiently by her side. But peace did not last. One afternoon, Edward received a call from his old friend and business partner, Sir Alistair Montgomery. His voice was firm, each word like an order. "Whitmore, I hear a strange rumor. You've got a nurse living in your house? Even feeding the child herself?" Edward forced his voice steady. "Yes. Charlotte needs her. We need to talk," Alistair said curtly. "Tomorrow evening. Don't make excuses." The next day, tensions settled over the manor, matching Amara's heartbeat. She had heard Edward mention Alistair, a powerful man of the old aristocracy, whose influence touched many of Edward's ventures. She knew someone like him would never easily accept her presence. When the doorbell rang, Amara was in the nursery with Charlotte. Downstairs, a booming, commanding male voice echoed the tone of a man used to issuing orders. Moments later, the nursery door opened without a knock. Amara's heart sank. Sir Alistair Montgomery stood in the doorway, brandy glass in hand, silver hair neatly combed, his tall figure radiating entitlement. "So this is the savior Edward keeps praising," he drawled, stretching the word as though dissecting it. Amara tightened and straightened her hold on Charlotte. "Sir Montgomery, I don't think you belong here. This is the nursery." He smirked. "I was merely curious. A woman of color, from modest origins, living under the Whitmore roof, nursing his child with her own body. The story sounds as entertaining as a play." Heat flushed Amara's veins. "This is no play. This is Charlotte's survival." Alistair sipped his brandy, eyes cold. "Clever of you. Use survival as your excuse to tie yourself to this family. But I've seen many like you women who enter the life of a grieving gentleman, trading pity for position." Amara trembled not with fear, but fury. She opened her mouth to retort, but the door burst open again. Edward strode in. He took in the scene, Amara clutching Charlotte, eyes blazing, Alistair leaning at the doorframe, lips curled in disdain. In an instant, he understood. "Alistair," Edward said, voice icy, "what are you doing in my daughter's room?" "Just acquainting myself with her wet nurse," Alistair replied smoothly. "You know me, I prefer to confirm rumors firsthand." Edward stepped forward, placing himself between Amara and the intruder. "She is not a wet nurse. She is the one who saved Charlotte when every doctor, every nurse, even I failed. You owe her respect." Alistair barked a bitter laugh. "Edward, you're blinded. Do you know what people out there will say? That a Whitmore child suckles from a hired woman of color. That isn't just a private scandal, it could ruin the company, your partnerships, even your seat on the board." Edward met his gaze, unflinching. "Let them talk. I would rather lose my reputation than lose my daughter." Alistair faltered, momentarily stunned, but then his voice dropped, sharp as poison. "And what about you? Do you truly think you can live with her in your home as if it were normal? One day, when you want to remarry, do you think society will accept this grotesque arrangement?" Amara froze. The words struck her deepest fear. That she would always be seen as lesser, that the love she gave Charlotte would one day be dismissed as a mistake. Edward's fists clenched. "Alastair, I lost Eleanor. I will not let anyone, not even you, hurt Charlotte again. We have nothing left to discuss if you cannot respect that." Alastair's eyes widened. "You're saying you'd cut ties with me?" "Yes," Edward answered firmly. "I choose my daughter. I choose decency over money stained with prejudice." The room thickened with silence. Amara stared at Edward, eyes brimming. For the first time, she saw a man of privilege willing to stand against his own world, to defend her, to protect both mother and child. Alastair sneered, setting his brandy glass down. "Very well. But remember this, Whitmore. Society does not forgive those who defy its rules. One day, you'll regret this." He turned and strode out, leaving behind a suffocating stillness. As the sound of his car faded, Edward turned back. Amara still held Charlotte tightly, her eyes wet. "You shouldn't have done that," she whispered. "Cutting ties with Montgomery will cost you dearly." Edward shook his head. "I've already lost too much, Amara. I can't lose more. Money and contracts can be regained, but Charlotte cannot. And you," his voice softened, "you cannot be treated with disdain in this house." Amara's throat closed. For a moment, she wanted to believe every barrier could be broken, but Alastair's words still echoed. "Society does not forgive those who defy its rules." She clutched Charlotte tighter, as if seeking her only anchor. After Sir Alastair's departure, the Whitmore estate was no longer as calm. His words echoed in Amara's mind for many nights. Even though Edward had defended her, the memory of scornful looks and cutting insinuations robbed her of sleep. One morning, just after Charlotte had nursed, the gate bell rang. Amara looked out the nursery window, and her heart sank. Miriam Johnson, her mother, stood there tall, thin, wrapped in a grey trench coat, her face so severe that even the morning mist seemed to recoil. Amara swallowed hard. Her mother had never set foot in Oxfordshire since learning she had taken work as a maid. Their estrangement had deepened after Grace's death. Miriam had always claimed her daughter was too weak and trusting of feelings instead of safeguarding her future. Edward quickly appeared in the hall, politely opening the door. "Mrs. Johnson, please, come in." Miriam stepped inside, briefly assessing Edward before settling on Amara, who held Charlotte. Without greeting, she said bluntly, "Victoria." Amara flinched. Her full name only surfaced when her mother was angry. "Mother, how did you know I was here?" "Rumors spread faster than you think," Miriam replied coldly. "All of Birmingham is whispering. My daughter, a woman of color, living in the manner of a white aristocrat, nursing his child with her own body. Do you realize what this will do to you?" Edward frowned, but Amara raised her hand, facing it herself. "Mother, I've done nothing wrong. Charlotte needs me. Without me, she would have." Her voice broke. "She would not have survived." "That is not your responsibility," Miriam snapped. "You lost Grace. You need healing to rebuild your life. Instead, you've chained yourself to a child who is not your own. You're digging a grave for your heart." Amara trembled. Her mother's words pierced her deepest fear, that this bond would only end with her losing everything again. Edward interjected, calm but firm. "Mrs. Johnson, Amara is not burying her heart. She saved Charlotte, and, I believe, she saved me as well. You may disapprove, but you cannot deny the truth." Miriam turned to him, her eyes sharp as glass. "Mr. Whitmore, do you even understand what you're doing? You bring a young, vulnerable woman into your house. Let her believe she has a place. When you change your mind, when society forces your hand, she'll be the one to pay. I've lived through this before." Her voice softened, carrying an old wound. "Amara's father once promised me the world, but when social pressure mounted, he left. I raised her alone. I won't let my daughter repeat that tragedy." Amara shuddered. Estranged though they were, she knew her mother spoke the truth. Miriam had tasted abandonment, and the fear of it was etched into her bones. "Mother," Amara whispered, "Edward is not father. He's different." "Are you certain?" Miriam pressed, eyes glistening. "Are you certain this man will stand by you when society turns against you? Are you certain he doesn't need you until the child is weaned?" Are you certain his feelings aren't just a substitute for the wife he lost? The questions cut like blades. Amara looked at Edward and saw him open his mouth to protest, but the brief silence before his words was enough to plant doubt. Charlotte stirred, whimpering. Amara clutched her closer, but her heart felt fractured. Miriam stepped forward, laying a hand on her daughter's shoulder. Come home, child. Leave this place before it's too late. Love won't save you from the world's judgment. But if you go now, you still have a chance to rebuild your life. Amara looked at Charlotte, then at Edward. Both were silent, though Edward's eyes pleaded. In that moment, she felt torn in two. One side her mother, her painful roots. The other, the present, where she had glimpsed new hope. At last her voice broke. Perhaps you're right, Mother. Perhaps I should go. Edward's face drained of color. He stepped forward, voice hoarse. Amara, don't let fear decide for you. We saved Charlotte together. We can stand against the world if we must. Amara shook her head, tears spilling. You might, but I can't. I can't live every day proving I deserve to stay. I'm too tired. The room grew heavy. Miriam wrapped an arm around her daughter's shoulders as Charlotte cried in Amara's embrace. Edward stood there, powerless, like a man losing everything for the second time. That night, Amara packed her things. Edward came to her door, but she could not open it. Through the wood, his voice reached her, leaden with sorrow. Amara, please don't go. Not for me, for Charlotte. She needs you. Amara leaned her forehead against the door, tears streaming. I need her too. But maybe love isn't enough to fight prejudice. She kissed Charlotte's forehead, laying her in the crib one last time, whispering, Forgive me, Lottie. Mama isn't strong enough. Then Amara turned away, walking out with a shattered heart. Birmingham, 1 month later. Amara had returned to the small flat her mother rented for the two of them, in the working-class neighborhood where she had grown up. She wore her nurse's uniform daily, and her 12-hour shifts were spent in the children's hospital. At night, she lay on a narrow bed, listening to the distant rumble of trams, and imagined she could still hear Charlotte crying for warmth. Grace, the daughter she had lost, still came to her in dreams. Lately, Charlotte appeared too, those clear blue eyes, tiny hands tugging her blouse, and crying when Amara turned away. She would wake in the dark, her chest wet with milk, her heart aching. Her stern mother, Miriam, seemed content when her daughter left the Whitmore estate. She believed she had prevented a mistake, but she never saw Amara behind closed doors, leaning against the wall with silent tears. Amara never complained, yet her pain showed in each weary step. One evening, as Amara was arranging medicines in the duty room, the head physician, Dr. Jonathan Clark, called her out. He was a blunt man, rarely one for pleasantries. Amara, I received a call from Oxfordshire. The local hospital referred it to me because it concerns you. Amara looked up, her heart sinking. Concerns, Charlotte? Clark nodded, his expression softening. Yes. The child has relapsed into malnutrition. The doctors tried everything, even hired other wet nurses, but Charlotte refused. She cried until she collapsed, losing dangerous weight. Her father Edward begged me to contact you. He believes only you can save her. Amara stood frozen, her chest tightening as if in a vice. Images surged back, Charlotte asleep in her arms, her tentative smiles, the way she looked at her as though the world existed in her eyes alone. No, it can't be, she whispered. Does she truly need me? Not just need, Clark said. She survives because of you. Cases like this are rare. I'd call it emotional failure to thrive. The child lost the one she saw as her mother, and her body responded by refusing to live. Amara sank into a chair, tears darkening her uniform. That night, she decided, she could not abandon Charlotte despite her mother's protests or society's cruelty. She hastily packed a few clothes, her nurse's notebook, and a small photograph of Grace. Miriam entered and froze at the sight. Where are you going? Amara looked up, her voice trembling but resolute. I must go back to Oxfordshire. Charlotte needs me. If I stay here, I'll be letting another child waste away in my hands. I can't let it happen again. Victoria. Miriam cried not in anger this time, but in anguish. "You don't understand. You'll suffer again. She isn't your own blood." Amara stepped forward and embraced her. They both wept in each other's arms for the first time in years. "Mother, Grace will never be replaced. But if my love can save Charlotte, I must go. I have to do for her what you once did for me. Fight, even if the whole world stands against me." Miriam sobbed, but at last let go. She knew her daughter had grown strong through pain, and nothing could stop her choice. The road to Oxfordshire felt twice as long. Amara drove through the night, her hands trembling with fear and longing. When her car stopped at the Whitmore gates, dawn had broken, painting the rose garden in soft amber. Edward was waiting. He looked gaunt, his eyes shadowed deep. He nearly rushed forward at the sight of her, then checked himself, as though afraid she might vanish like a dream. "Amara," his voice was hoarse. "You came." She didn't answer, only asked, "Where is Charlotte?" He led her to the nursery. The sight stole Amara's breath. Charlotte lay motionless and frail in the crib, her eyes closed. The once noisy room was now unnervingly silent. Amara lifted her. At that instant, Charlotte's eyes opened blue and wet with tears fixing on her. A tiny hand reached out, clutching her blouse desperately, as if terrified to lose her again. "Oh, Lottie," Amara whispered, choked with tears. "Mama's home." The baby wailed, not in despair this time, but in the shuddering relief of reunion. Amara nursed her immediately, tears streaming. Charlotte latched greedily, calming little by little, her cheeks flushing with life again. Edward sank into a chair, covering his face, his shoulders shaking. His muffled sobs filled the room. An hour later, Charlotte slept peacefully in Amara's arms. Edward looked up, his eyes bloodshot. "You saved her again, and you saved me." Amara met his gaze, her heart heavy yet radiant. "I couldn't turn away. No matter what my mother or the world says, I know my place is here, with Charlotte, and with you." Edward clasped her hand, saying nothing. But in their eyes, the unspoken was finally undeniable. They were no longer simply a father and a wet nurse. They had become a family, bound by loss, hope, and love. By the following spring, the Whitmore glasshouse had been utterly transformed. What was once a ruin now burst with life. Clusters of ripe red tomatoes, fragrant herbs, heirloom roses climbing trellises in full bloom. Beneath the vaulted glass, light poured down, painting the flowers into a living canvas. Amara stood before the mirror in the small room Edward had given her from the start. But today, she wore neither her nurse's uniform nor gardening clothes. Instead, she wore a simple white dress, hand-stitched by a local seamstress. Not lavish, not ostentatious, but graceful, modest enough for her to feel she was stepping into a new beginning. Charlotte, now 18 months old, toddled about the room clutching a tiny rose Edward had cut for her. She chirped, "Mama pretty." Amara bent down, embracing her, eyes glistening. The word mama had first left Charlotte's lips months ago, and since then, it had become the rhythm of Amara's heart. Though not bound by blood, the child had chosen her, and that choice was stronger than any biology. Close friends, a few villagers, and even Dr. Clark gathered that afternoon. Miriam was there too, seated in the front row. She wore a dark purple coat, her features still severe, but her gaze softened as she watched her daughter shine. Edward stood at the center of the glass house, the aisle strewn with rose petals. He wore a navy suit, not with the distance of an aristocrat, but with the trembling joy of a man overwhelmed by happiness. When Amara entered, hand in hand with Charlotte, all eyes followed. Edward drew a deep breath, his face alight as though the shadows had lifted for the first time in years. The vows began. The minister read briefly about love, enduring through loss, and then gave way to them. Edward looked at Amara, his voice rough but resolute. "Amara, you came when Charlotte needed you most, and when I believed I could not go on. You saved her, and you saved my heart. I vow never to let you stand alone against the world. I vow to love you, to protect you, and to raise this family with you, no matter what prejudice lies beyond these walls." Tears streamed down Amara's cheeks. but her smile glowed. She answered, "Edward, you did not choose me out of duty, but out of faith. I lost Grace, and I thought my heart was shattered forever. But then I found Charlotte, and I found you. I've learned that love does not die, it changes shape. I vow to love Charlotte as my own, to love you as my lifelong companion. And I vow that together we will turn our sorrow into new life." Applause filled the glass house as they exchanged rings. Charlotte clapped, then rushed forward, wrapping her small arms around them. That tiny embrace sealed the moment. This was not just a wedding, but the birth of a family. The celebration was simple local dishes, homemade wine. No one needed grandeur. They had joy and belonging. Miriam, who had once fought bitterly against it all, stepped forward to embrace her daughter. "I was wrong to think you were repeating my mistakes," she whispered. "You chose differently, and I'm proud of you." Amara held her mother close, tears falling, but her heart lighter than ever. Past and present had finally reconciled. 1 year later, the glass house rang with laughter once more. Amara sat in a wooden chair, cradling a newborn son, her and Edward's child. Beside her, Charlotte sang softly, attempting to lull her brother with the melody of the unfinished lullaby she and Edward had once completed together. From the music room, Edward played that same lullaby on the piano. Its notes drifted through the manor, entwined with the voices of children. Amara looked around, roses in bloom, her daughter singing, her baby sleeping soundly, and the man she loved bathed in the glow of afternoon light. She knew then, this was renewal not only of Whitmore Manor but also of her heart. That day, Amara wrote in her journal, "Love does not erase loss, but turns it into soil where new life can grow. The glass house was once abandoned, but now it thrives. So too does my heart, and if the world should sneer, I will smile. Because in this family, we chose one another, and that choice is stronger than any prejudice."